Also tonight, more than 5,000 American troops heading to the border to stop the migrant caravan from getting into the U.S. The president warned these migrants today not to cross the border illegally. Our Eyewitness News border reporter Oscar Margain shows us exactly how federal agents intend to barricade the border.
Our concept of operations is to flow in our military assets with a priority to build up southern Texas, and then Arizona, and then California.
The United States Northern Command announced the deployment of 5,200 active Reserve and National Guard to the southwest border to help Customs and Border Protection with border security. That's in addition to the 2,092 already at the border from the first deployment earlier this year, totaling to more than 7,000, a number on par with the amount of U.S. forces in Syria and Iraq combined. Meanwhile, Customs and Border Protection agents have been spotted wearing anti-riot gear and performing drills along all the ports of entry on the U.S.-Mexico border. This in anticipation of a migrant caravan that has reportedly dwindled from roughly 7,000 to 3,500 in the last 2 weeks. The head of the group making a short stop in the town of Santiago Niltepec in the state of Oaxaca to rest. But that hasn't stopped President Trump from threatening migrants with the military. Taking to Twitter, he claimed, quote, many gang members and some very bad people are mixed into the caravan. He said, this is an invasion of our country and our military is waiting for you. In a show of military strength, Mexico pushing back on the second half of the caravan stuck crossing the Suchiate River on the border with Guatemala.
El plan, estás en tu casa.
In an attempt to stop the caravan, Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto issued an offer of health care, schooling, and temporary employment to asylum seekers as long as they don't move past Mexico's southern states.
The President of Mexico has offered very generously protections.
It's an offer the U.S. government is applauding, but that many in the caravan have already rejected, as their wish is to reach the U.S.
The Department of Defense says the troops will arrive by the end of the week and will assist CBP with operational planning, surveillance, and equipment. Meanwhile, CBP says their riot control teams are ready in case large groups show up at the border all at once. In Weslaco, on the Texas-Mexico border, I'm Oscar Margain reporting.